The slap hadn't happened yet, but the silence before it had been building for years. If you'd met Elise Carter 5 years ago, you would have thought she had it all. The elegant townhouse in Manhattan, the husband whose name opened doors, the little girl with the laugh that could melt the hardest heart. She looked like a woman living the dream. But sometimes, dreams are prisons painted gold. Elise had never been a social climber. She worked for it, every step, every promotion, every late night spent at the museum cataloging art until her back ached. She'd built a name for herself as a curator with vision, someone who could make people feel something through color and light. That's how she met Nathaniel Pierce. He walked into the Metropolitan Modern Gallery one evening, during a private charity auction. The kind of event where champagne costs more than most people's rent. He wasn't loud about his wealth, but you could see it in his posture, his confidence, the quiet authority that said, "I'm used to getting what I want." He owned Pierce Development Group, a company that practically shaped half of New York's skyline. He wasn't just rich, he was influential. The kind of man whose name could make a mayor return a call at midnight. But that night, his eyes weren't on the donors or the art. They were on Elise. She remembered the way he lingered by a painting of a woman standing in the rain. "It's not sad," she'd told him when he asked why she loved it. "It's honest. Sometimes you can't tell if the rain is washing her clean or breaking her down." He'd smiled then. "Maybe it's both." That was Nathaniel, intense, curious, persuasive. He pursued her with quiet determination, flowers left at the gallery, dinner invitations, long conversations about life and purpose. He said he admired her independence. Her strength. Her vision. When he proposed 6 months later, Elise hesitated for a heartbeat. He was from a different world, old money, private schools, a family that read the Wall Street Journal at breakfast. She was a woman who grew up sharing a bedroom with her little sister in a tiny Bronx apartment. But love, she thought, could bridge anything. Within a year, they were married. The ceremony was at the Pierce family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a mansion so large it looked like it had its own weather system. The lawns rolled out like emerald seas, the chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and every guest looked like they'd stepped out of a society magazine. And at the center of it all stood Victoria Pierce, Nathaniel's mother. Impeccable. Elegant. Sharp as glass. She smiled for photos but never for Elise. During the reception, she took Elise's hand and said with a tone that dripped sugar and venom, "You must feel so lucky, dear. Not everyone marries into legacy." Elise laughed politely, but deep down, something inside her whispered a warning. She pushed it aside. For the first year, things were beautiful, or maybe she was too dazzled to see the cracks. Nathaniel was charming, attentive, and deeply ambitious. He loved control, but Elise mistook it for confidence. When she got pregnant with their daughter, she thought it was a new beginning. They named her Lila, after Elise's grandmother, a woman who'd taught her that strength was a quiet kind of rebellion. Lila was perfect. Big brown eyes, curls that defied gravity, laughter that filled the house. Elise loved her with a fierceness that scared her sometimes. But motherhood changed the balance of power in the marriage. Suddenly, Elise wasn't just Nathaniel's elegant wife, she was the mother of a child Victoria considered a Pierce heir. And Victoria Pierce had opinions. "Oh, we don't do pacifiers," she'd said one morning when Elise walked into the nursery. "It ruins their teeth. I told the nanny to throw them out." "Elise, dear, that shade of pink isn't very flattering on Lila's complexion. She should wear softer tones. She shouldn't be running barefoot in the garden. Proper girls don't do that. Proper girls. Proper wives. Proper mothers." Every word from Victoria was a judgment wrapped in lace. Nathaniel never intervened. "That's just how mother is," he'd say. "Don't take it personally. She means well." The same sentence, over and over, like a record stuck on repeat. Elise tried to adapt. She straightened her posture, softened her voice, wore the colors Victoria approved of. But it didn't matter how much she bent, she was never enough. Her cooking was too spicy, her hair too natural, her background too modest. And Lila, beautiful, spirited Lila, was too loud, too curious, too alive for Victoria's pristine world. When Lila turned 5, Victoria suggested they move into the family estate for convenience. Nathaniel agreed before Elise could even form a protest. The mansion was breathtaking, but it didn't feel like home. Elise often said it felt like living inside a painting, beautiful, cold, and utterly silent. The walls carried secrets. The staff moved like ghosts. And Victoria's presence was everywhere, hovering, watching, judging. Still, Elise tried to make it work. For Lila. She hosted art shows, attended charity events, played the part of the perfect society wife. People admired her grace, her intelligence, her composure. No one saw the cracks forming underneath. Then came the Sunday dinners. They were mandatory, Victoria's family tradition. Nathaniel insisted they go every week. It keeps the family close, he'd say. But close wasn't the word Elise would use. Claustrophobic, maybe. Toxic, definitely. That evening started like all the others. The table gleamed with fine china. A butler poured wine that cost more than most people's cars. Victoria sat at the head, her diamonds flashing in the candlelight. Elise wore a simple emerald dress, Nathaniel's favorite color on her. Lila, in a frilly blue gown her grandmother had chosen, sat between them, humming softly to herself as she arranged her peas into little shapes on her plate. "Lila, darling," Victoria said with a tight smile, "why don't you tell us what you learned in school this week?" Lila looked up, eager. "We learned about Dr. Maya Angelou. She was a poet and she..." Victoria's expression froze. "Ah. That's lovely." Her tone made the words sound like inconvenient. "Perhaps next week they'll teach you about someone a bit more traditional." Elise's fork paused midair. "Maya Angelou is a classic," she said evenly. Victoria didn't look at her. "Of course, dear." Nathaniel cleared his throat, signaling a silent plea, "Don't make a scene." So Elise swallowed her irritation, just as she always did. After dinner, Lila asked if she could play in the sitting room. Elise nodded. She could see her daughter from the table, twirling to a song only she could hear. Then it happened. It started with a sound. A soft clink. The delicate vase near the fireplace tipped, wobbled, and crashed to the marble floor. The room froze. Lila gasped. "Oh no. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't mean to." Elise rose instantly. "It's okay, baby. It's just a vase." Victoria's voice sliced through the air. "Just a vase?" That was a hand-painted heirloom from Florence. She turned to Lila, her face a mask of outrage. "Do you have any idea how careless?" "Mom, stop," Elise said, moving closer to her daughter. "It was an accident." "She needs discipline," Victoria snapped. "Children must learn boundaries." "She's 5, Elise said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. Nathaniel looked between them, uncomfortable, but said nothing. And then, before Elise could move, Victoria's hand shot out. The slap landed with a sound that cracked through the room like a thunderclap. Lila's small body jolted, her cheek blooming red. The silence that followed was unbearable. Elise's breath caught in her throat. For a second, no one moved. Even the butler froze mid-step. Then Lila began to cry, deep, shaking sobs that tore through Elise's chest. She scooped her daughter into her arms, her voice shaking. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." Victoria stood there, unbothered, her chin high. "That child has no respect," she said. Someone had to correct her. Elise's eyes burned with disbelief. "You hit my daughter." "She needed to learn her place," Victoria replied coldly. Elise turned to Nathaniel. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Say something." He looked down at his plate, then at his mother. "Lila," he said slowly, "apologize to your grandmother for breaking her vase." Elise stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. What did you just say? Nathaniel sighed. It wasn't that hard, Elise. Don't make a scene. Mother didn't mean. She hit our child. It was barely a tap, he said, his tone dripping with patronizing calm. You're overreacting. Mother came from a different generation. Discipline looks different to her. Elise felt the room spin. She could taste the betrayal like metal in her mouth. Lila clung to her, still crying, whispering, Mommy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Elise kissed her forehead. You did nothing wrong. Then she turned back to Nathaniel, her voice steady but deadly quiet. If you think I'm going to sit here and let this happen, you don't know me at all. She grabbed her purse, lifted Lila, and walked toward the door. Nathaniel's voice followed her, frustrated and dismissive. Elise. Don't be ridiculous. Dinner isn't over. She didn't even look back. That night, as she held her daughter close, Elise knew something had ended. The fairy tale had shattered. The truth had been there all along, she'd just refused to see it. She wasn't living in a marriage. She was living in a gilded cage. And that slap wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her awakening. Sometimes life has to hit you hard, literally or emotionally, to wake you up. Love should never silence you. No title, no money, no mansion is worth losing your self-respect or your child's safety. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Elise didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark with Lila's small body curled against her chest, feeling the rhythm of her daughter's breathing, the little hiccups that followed hours of crying. Every time Elise closed her eyes, she saw it again, the flash of Victoria's hand, the stunned look on Lila's face, the smug calm of Nathaniel's eyes as he told her to apologize. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed on your ears until it hurt. She could hear the faint hum of the central air, the tick of the antique clock in the hallway, and the sound of her own heart pounding in her chest. Around midnight, she heard the car pull up. Nathaniel's. The front door opened, then closed softly. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, echoed down the hall. He didn't knock when he entered their bedroom. He just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking at her. Elise, he said finally, his voice controlled. We need to talk. She didn't move. No, Nathaniel. You need to listen. He sighed, the way people sigh when they believe they're being reasonable. You embarrassed my mother tonight. Her laugh came out sharp, disbelieving. Your mother hit our child, and you're worried about embarrassment? It wasn't like that. She left a mark on her face. She didn't mean to hurt her, he said. You know how she is. She's from a different generation. She believes in structure, in discipline. Nathaniel, stop hiding behind that excuse, Elise snapped, her voice trembling. You keep saying she's from a different time, but guess what? So are abusers. So are people who destroy others and call it tradition. He frowned. You're being dramatic again. There it was, the word. Dramatic. The word used to silence women for generations. She stood, holding Lila tighter. If defending my daughter makes me dramatic, then I'll wear that like a crown. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Elise, be reasonable. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Apologize to Mother tomorrow. Let's move forward. Apologize? Her voice cracked. To the woman who assaulted my child? She feels terrible. No, she doesn't, Elise whispered. You saw her face. She felt powerful. He rubbed his temples. You're tired. You're emotional. We'll talk in the morning. And just like that, he turned and walked away, because that's what men like him did. They ended conversations when reality became inconvenient. That night, Elise made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let her daughter grow up believing that silence was strength. The next morning, she packed a small bag for Lila, clothes, a favorite stuffed rabbit, her sketchbook. She didn't know where they'd go yet, but she knew they had to leave. When she reached the kitchen, Victoria was already there, sipping tea like nothing had happened. "Elise," she said pleasantly. "You look tired. Perhaps some rest will help you see things clearly." Elise looked her dead in the eye. "The only thing I see clearly is that you will never come near my daughter again." Victoria's smile faltered for the briefest moment, then returned, brittle and practiced. "Careful, dear. Threats don't suit you. Especially when you have so much to lose." "Are you threatening me?" Elise asked quietly. "Just reminding you," Victoria said, setting her cup down with a delicate clink, "that this family protects its own. Nathaniel is a Pierce. You're a guest who married into privilege. Don't confuse your place." Elise's grip tightened on the handle of Lila's bag. "You mistake my kindness for weakness. That's your first mistake." Victoria's smile disappeared. "And your second?" "Thinking I need this family to survive." She turned and walked out, her heels striking the marble floor like a battle drum. Elise drove for hours that day, the road stretching endlessly before her. She didn't have a plan, but she had purpose. She ended up at a small apartment in Harlem owned by her college friend, Jasmine, who worked as a photographer. Jasmine took one look at Lila's bruised cheek and pulled them both into a hug. "Oh, hell no," she said fiercely. "We're not letting that slide." Elise stayed there for a few days, long enough for the bruises to fade but not the memory. Lila drew pictures in her sketchbook, of flowers, of the city skyline, of her mother holding her hand. But sometimes, she'd draw a woman with sharp eyes and no mouth. Elise knew who it was. Jasmine urged her to go to the police, but Elise hesitated. "They'll spin it. They'll say I'm emotional, unstable, trying to take advantage of his money. He has power, connections. I need to be smart." And smart she was. Before the marriage, Elise had been a curator, but she'd also learned to document everything. She started writing down dates, incidents, conversations. She took photos of the bruise. She saved text messages, recorded phone calls when Victoria or Nathaniel's words cut deep. One night, as she scrolled through the photos on her phone, she saw herself in one of them, smiling beside Nathaniel at a gala. She barely recognized that woman. So polished, so quiet, so small. That was the night she realized something. She'd been living in Nathaniel's world for so long that she'd forgotten her own power. She wasn't the helpless wife they thought she was. She was Elise Carter, top of her class, the woman who built an art career through grit and talent. It was time to remember who she'd been before the mansion swallowed her whole. Days turned into weeks. Nathaniel called at first, leaving messages that alternated between charm and irritation. "Elise, this is childish. Come home. You're overreacting. Mother didn't mean it. Think about Lila. She deserves her father." Then, when she didn't answer, the tone changed. "If you don't come back, I'll make things difficult. You signed a prenup. Everything is in the family trust." And finally, the one that chilled her blood. "You're nothing without me." Elise stared at her phone, trembling, but not from fear. From clarity. Because the moment someone says you're nothing without them, they've just reminded you how much you mean. She reached out to Clara Mendoza, a lawyer known for fighting for women in high-profile divorces. Clara listened quietly, her face unreadable as Elise explained everything, from the slap to the silence that followed. When Elise finished, Clara leaned back in her chair and said, "Do you have proof?" Elise slid her phone across the table. "I have more than proof. I have their arrogance recorded." Clara smiled slowly. "Then you don't need to survive this, Elise. You can win it." Still, Elise wasn't satisfied with just leaving. Something inside her, something fierce and righteous, wanted justice. Not revenge. Justice. Because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who'd been gaslit into silence, every child told to respect cruelty because it came wrapped in wealth. While preparing her case, Elise began uncovering things about Nathaniel's company that didn't add up. Expense reports that didn't match public filings. Land acquisitions that looked suspiciously predatory. She remembered an article she'd read months earlier by a journalist named Marcus Reed, known for exposing corruption in urban development. His pieces had forced city councils to reopen investigations. She sent him a message. "Mr. Reed, I have information about Pierce Development Group. You'll want to see this." He replied within the hour. They met in a small cafe downtown, where Elise handed him a flash drive filled with documents she'd quietly copied from Nathaniel's home office. "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked, eyes wide. "I was married to the man," she said. "I stopped pretending not to notice the rot." Marcus looked at her like someone seeing a storm form on the horizon. "If this checks out, it could bring down half of Manhattan's real estate elite." "Good," Elise said. "Let it." Meanwhile, Victoria didn't stay silent. She showed up one afternoon at the gallery where Elise had once worked, parading her pearls and her false civility. "You've made quite the spectacle of yourself," she said, her tone dripping pity. "You could have had everything, Elise. Now you have nothing." Elise smiled faintly. "Nothing? Funny. I feel lighter than I have in years." Victoria leaned in. "You think the courts will believe you over the Pierces? We've donated to every judge in this county. Then maybe it's time the right people see who you really are." For the first time, Elise saw it, fear flickering in Victoria's eyes. It was small, but it was there. Powerful people aren't afraid of losing money. They're afraid of losing reputation. When Marcus's article dropped 2 months later, it was like a bomb going off. Pierce Development under fire, evidence suggests widespread corruption and predatory tactics. It detailed everything: illegal evictions, tax fraud, political bribes. Elise's evidence was the backbone of the exposé. Reporters camped outside the Pierce estate. Investors pulled out overnight. Federal investigators launched inquiries. Nathaniel called her in a panic. "Elise, what did you do?" "What you taught me," she said. "I took control." He laughed bitterly. "You think this helps you? You're destroying our family. Our family died the day your mother raised her hand against our daughter." There was a long silence. Then he said coldly, "You'll regret this." Elise hung up without a word. Because regret was for people who hadn't yet found their strength. Days later, she got a letter from Victoria's attorney, an absurd attempt to file for temporary custody of Lila, claiming Elise was emotionally unstable. That was their final mistake. Elise and Clara went to court armed with photos, recordings, and Marcus's published story linking the Pierces to fraud and abuse. The judge, a stern woman with a streak of steel in her voice, listened carefully. When Elise played the recording of Victoria saying, "Don't confuse your place," the courtroom went silent. For the first time, Victoria looked small. The motion was denied. Lila would stay with Elise. Permanently. That night, Elise took Lila to the roof of their new apartment. The city lights shimmered around them. "Mommy," Lila said, her voice sleepy, "are we safe now?" Elise kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. We're free." She looked out over the skyline, the same skyline Nathaniel once claimed to own, and felt something powerful stir inside her. She'd been dismissed. Disrespected. Broken down. But she'd also risen. Because when you strip away the lies, the titles, the money, what remains is truth. And truth, once freed, cannot be silenced. Never let anyone convince you that silence is peace. Sometimes peace requires confrontation. Sometimes strength means walking away from comfort to protect your soul. The world will tell you that power is money, but real power is integrity, because money fades, but truth echoes forever. The city had a strange way of moving on. One week, the headlines screamed Pierce Empire under investigation. The next, new scandals took over, new faces, new stories. But behind closed doors, the Pierces weren't moving on. They were unraveling. Nathaniel's empire, once untouchable, was bleeding money. Investors fled. Partners backed out of projects. Politicians stopped returning his calls. The glossy facade of wealth was cracking, revealing the rot underneath. And through it all, Elise stayed silent. She didn't chase attention, didn't gloat. She simply rebuilt. Quietly. Steadily. Every morning, she'd wake before sunrise, make breakfast for Lila, then work from her tiny apartment living room, turning her passion for art into something new. She began curating online exhibitions for underrepresented artists, women, single mothers, minorities. Within weeks, her platform started gaining traction. People loved her story. Not because she was the ex-wife of a disgraced billionaire, but because she was proof that dignity doesn't need permission to shine. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was learning a truth that power always hides until it's too late. That loyalty built on fear doesn't survive exposure. His board turned on him. His lawyers withdrew representation. The same men who once toasted his brilliance now avoided eye contact when he entered a room. And the one person he'd always counted on, his mother, had gone silent too. Victoria spent her days behind drawn curtains, drowning in paranoia. Her name had become a whisper at charity luncheons. Every interview request was an ambush, every photo op a reminder that her family name now stood for disgrace. At night, she'd sit alone in her grand drawing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, searching for the woman she used to be. But all she saw was the echo of power slipping away. Because karma doesn't knock politely. It walks right in. Elise tried to keep life simple for Lila, but fame has a way of finding the unwilling. A video clip surfaced, taken during one of her court hearings. It showed Elise walking out of the courthouse holding Lila's hand, chin high, eyes steady, walking past a storm of reporters who shouted questions like daggers. Someone on social media captioned it. "Strength wears no crown." It went viral overnight. Messages poured in from women around the world, survivors, single mothers, daughters who'd been silenced. They saw themselves in her calm defiance, her refusal to shrink. Jasmine told her, "Girl, you've become a symbol." Elise smiled softly. "I didn't want to be one. I just wanted to be free." "Exactly," Jasmine said. "That's why you are." But not everyone celebrated her rise. Nathaniel wasn't done. He filed an appeal for shared custody, this time backed by a new PR team and a strategy designed to spin him as a misunderstood father. "Let the public see the softer side of Nathaniel Pierce," his advisor said on a leaked recording. "Tell them you're a man rebuilding his life. Say you forgive her. Forgive her." When Elise heard that, she almost laughed. Still, she prepared for the storm. Clara, her lawyer, was relentless. "They're playing the sympathy card. But sympathy can't erase truth. We'll fight this the same way we fought everything else, with evidence." So they gathered documents, testimonies, and character statements. Marcus, the journalist, even offered to testify about the pressure he'd faced from the Pierce's legal team to retract his story. This wasn't just another custody hearing. This was war. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was surrounded by media vans. Cameras flashed as Elise stepped out of her car, dressed in a simple navy suit. She looked calm, but her hands trembled slightly when she held Lila's hand. Nathaniel arrived moments later, perfectly styled, flanked by his PR team, smiling as if the world hadn't already seen the truth. He approached her outside the courthouse. "Elise." She didn't look at him. "Nathaniel. You don't have to do this," he said smoothly. "Think about Lila. She deserves both parents." "She deserves honesty," Elise replied. "You can start there." His smile faltered, just slightly. Inside the courtroom, Nathaniel's attorney spoke first, painting him as a loving father who'd been unfairly vilified by a media frenzy. They called witnesses to testify about his charitable work, his business success, his commitment to family values. Then came their attempt to undermine Elise. They questioned her emotional stability, her decision to leave, even the fact that she'd spoken to the press. "Mrs. Pierce," the lawyer asked, "would you say you have a tendency to dramatize situations?" Elise smiled faintly. "Only when they involve protecting my daughter." A quiet ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Even the judge smirked. Then it was Clara's turn. She didn't waste time. She played recordings, displayed photos, produced copies of Nathaniel's threatening messages. She called Marcus Reed to the stand, who testified about the Pierces' attempts to silence him through intimidation. And then, she called Victoria. The courtroom gasped. Victoria entered like a ghost of her former self, hair perfectly styled but eyes hollow. She sat down, adjusting her pearls, pretending composure. Clara began gently. "Mrs. Pierce, do you recall an evening at your son's estate when you struck your granddaughter?" Victoria stiffened. "That's a gross exaggeration." "So you deny it?" "I merely corrected her behavior." Clara pressed play on the courtroom monitor. A recording filled the room, Victoria's voice, cold and sharp. "You should teach that child manners." "Don't confuse your place, Elise." Gasps echoed. The judge's expression hardened. Victoria looked around, realizing too late that the empire she built on control had just collapsed under her own words. The ruling came that afternoon. Full custody to Elise. No visitation rights granted to Victoria. Nathaniel's financial misconduct cases would proceed independently. As the judge read the verdict, Elise exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a prayer. Nathaniel sat motionless, his face pale, his jaw clenched. When the judge finished, he rose slowly and turned to Elise. "You ruined me," he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once seemed so powerful now looked small, fragile, almost lost. "I didn't ruin you," she said. "You did that all by yourself." Then she took Lila's hand and walked out, the cameras waiting, the world watching. Days later, Elise received a letter, not from Nathaniel, but from Victoria. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even defensive. It was regretful. "I thought control was the only way to survive," it read. "But I see now, power without compassion turns to poison. You have my son's fire, but your strength. Protect it. For her." Elise read the letter twice, then tucked it into a drawer. Forgiveness didn't erase pain, but it allowed peace to return where bitterness once lived. Months passed. Elise's art platform flourished. She hosted her first physical exhibition, Reclaimed Voices, featuring works by women who had survived silence, abuse, and reinvention. The opening night drew hundreds, including Marcus, Jasmine, and even Clara. In one corner of the gallery hung a photo, black and white, of Elise and Lila walking down the courthouse steps hand in hand. The caption read, "Freedom is not revenge. It's return." As the crowd mingled, a young woman approached Elise. "Your story saved me," she said softly. "I was in a marriage like yours. Seeing you fight, it gave me courage to leave." Elise smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then it was all worth it." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Elise stood alone in the gallery, staring at the paintings, each one a testament to pain turned into purpose. She thought about the mansion, the slap, the courtrooms, the sleepless nights. And then she thought about Lila's laughter echoing through their small apartment, free and unafraid. She whispered to herself, "Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with redemption." Outside, rain began to fall, a soft, steady rhythm against the windows. But Elise didn't see it as sorrow. It was cleansing. A quiet applause from the universe for a woman who refused to stay broken. Karma doesn't always arrive in thunder and fire. Sometimes it comes as silence, truth, and time. You don't need to destroy those who hurt you, just outgrow them. The greatest victory is becoming untouchable in peace, knowing your worth no longer needs validation. The world had moved on from the Pierces, but Elise hadn't. Not because she missed them, she didn't. But because she understood something that most people never would, walking away from power doesn't mean you stop feeling its shadow. It lingers, in headlines, in whispers, in the way people look at you like you're both survivor and scandal. But Elise had learned to live with that. Every scar, every headline, every sleepless night, it all became part of her. Not baggage, but armor. Her art foundation had grown beyond anything she imagined. What started as a small online collective had turned into the Lila Project, named after her daughter. Its mission was simple yet revolutionary: to help women rebuild through creativity. They hosted workshops in shelters, partnered with schools, and provided therapy through art. Elise became the quiet force behind it all, not seeking fame, but impact. She gave interviews only when necessary, speaking softly but with conviction. When one journalist asked her, "What drives you?" Elise answered, "Healing isn't revenge. It's reclaiming what pain tried to take." The quote trended for days. But karma wasn't done writing the story. Nathaniel's empire collapsed completely that year. Federal investigators found enough evidence of fraud to freeze his assets. His name became synonymous with greed. In a bitter twist of irony, the same business magazines that once hailed him as a visionary now called him the fall of the Pierce legacy. His face vanished from society events. Friends stopped calling. Even his lawyer dropped him when the legal bills went unpaid. The last thing Elise heard was that he'd sold the family mansion to cover debts. The mansion where everything had begun. The mansion where it all had ended. Victoria, too, disappeared from the public eye. Rumors said she'd moved to an estate in Connecticut, living quietly, nursing the loneliness that comes when your name no longer commands respect. Elise didn't celebrate their downfall. She didn't need to. She simply looked at her daughter and whispered a silent thank you to fate. Because peace was its own form of revenge. 2 years passed. Elise turned 32. Lila was 7 now, bright, curious, and bold, with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. She no longer drew pictures of the woman with no mouth. Now, she painted skies, cities, and strong women with wings. Elise often joined her, both of them sitting cross-legged on the floor, covered in paint. Those were the moments that reminded her that life could still be beautiful after devastation. One afternoon, as they packed up after a gallery event, a man approached. He was tall, with kind eyes and a camera slung around his neck. "Elise Carter," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Daniel Hayes. I've been following your work. The Lila Project is extraordinary." She smiled politely. "Thank you. We're still growing. I run a documentary series, Stories That Heal. I'd love to feature you. Not just the scandal," he added quickly, "but the recovery. The rebuilding. People need to see what healing looks like." Normally, Elise would have declined. Cameras still made her uneasy. But something about his tone, gentle, respectful, made her pause. "Maybe," she said cautiously. "If it helps someone." A few weeks later, Daniel visited her studio. He filmed quietly, asking questions that didn't pry but invited reflection. "What was the hardest part?" he asked one afternoon, as Elise painted. "Believing I was still worthy," she said softly. "After everything fell apart, I thought maybe I was the problem. But pain isn't proof that you deserved it, it's proof that you survived it." Daniel lowered the camera, his expression thoughtful. "That's powerful." She smiled. "It's just truth." They became friends after that. Coffee turned into long walks through Central Park. Conversations about art turned into laughter that came easily, like sunlight through clouds. Still, Elise was careful. Trust didn't come easily to someone who had been betrayed under the illusion of love. Daniel never rushed her. He just showed up, consistently, quietly, with respect. He once told her, "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that's comfortable for them." It was such a simple statement, but it stayed with her. Months later, when Stories That Heal, the Lila Project premiered, it went viral. Not for drama, not for gossip, but for honesty. The film opened with Elise's voice over footage of women painting, sculpting, creating. They told us to smile through pain. But art taught us to feel it, to shape it, to make beauty from the ashes. Viewers around the world wrote in. Survivors said they finally felt seen. Donations poured into the foundation. Invitations arrived, from universities, from global organizations, from people who wanted her to speak. Elise declined most of them, but one invitation caught her eye. A charity gala in Manhattan, ironically, the same ballroom where she'd first met Nathaniel years ago. She hesitated. That room was haunted with memory. But something deep inside whispered, go back, not to relive, but to reclaim. The night of the gala, Elise walked into the Metropolitan Grand Hall, the same chandeliers glittering above, the same red carpet rolling across the marble floor. But this time, she didn't walk in as someone's wife. She walked in as her own name. Daniel was with her, dressed in a black tuxedo, his camera hanging loosely at his side. When she stepped through the entrance, heads turned. Conversations paused. It wasn't scandal this time. It was respect. Reporters whispered. That's Elise Carter, the one who built the Lila project. She looks incredible. She really came back stronger. She didn't stop for interviews. She didn't need validation anymore. Every step she took across that marble floor was a declaration. I survived. I rose. I reclaimed. Halfway through the night, a hush fell over the room. Nathaniel had arrived. He looked nothing like the man she remembered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion. The tailored suits were exchanged for simplicity, the gleam of power replaced by the dullness of humility, or maybe regret. He saw her across the room and froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, he walked over slowly. Elise. Hello, Nathaniel. You look, well. I am. He nodded, hesitating. I saw the documentary. You did good work. Thank you. I didn't realize what I was destroying until it was gone, he said, voice low. My company, my reputation, you. I just wanted control. I thought control meant strength. She met his eyes. And now? He exhaled. Now I know strength is what you showed me, walking away. For the first time, there was no bitterness between them. Just closure. Take care of yourself, Nathaniel, she said gently. And she walked away. Not out of pride. But peace. Later that night, she stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city glimmered below, alive and endless. Daniel joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Are you okay? He asked. Elise smiled faintly. Better than okay. He raised his glass. To starting over. She clinked hers against his. To never needing to be anyone's shadow again. They stood there in silence, the hum of New York beneath them, the wind carrying the sound of laughter and possibility. And for the first time in years, Elise allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt since before the mansion, hope. Not the naive kind. The grounded kind that comes from pain, healing, and rebirth. Weeks later, she stood in front of a classroom full of young women during a workshop, telling them her story. How did you forgive? One girl asked. Elise thought for a moment. Forgiveness isn't saying what they did was okay, she said softly. It's saying what they did no longer controls you. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the women began to clap. She looked at them, faces filled with strength, fear, and dreams, and smiled. Because she finally understood her purpose. Her pain hadn't been punishment. It had been preparation. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Elise stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. There was no mansion, no empire, no wealth measured in marble and glass. Just a small apartment, filled with laughter, paint, and love. And yet, she'd never felt richer. The mansion had been made of stone. But this life, was built from courage. The past loses its power when you stop living in it. Redemption doesn't mean erasing what happened, it means transforming it. When you rise again, don't rise to prove them wrong, rise to prove yourself right. Because the greatest revenge is to live free, loved, and unafraid. 3 years passed. Time didn't erase what had happened, but it softened the edges. Pain no longer screamed, it hummed quietly in the background, a melody Elise had learned to live with. She still painted. Still built. Still spoke. But more than anything, she lived, honestly, loudly, freely. The Lila Project had grown beyond her imagination. It now had branches in 5 cities, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and Dallas. Each location served as a haven for women rebuilding their lives after trauma. Elise often traveled between them, not as a CEO but as a mentor. She'd sit on paint-stained floors with survivors, listen to their stories, and remind them they weren't broken, just remade. Art saved me, she'd tell them. Not because it made me forget, but because it helped me remember who I was before they tried to break me. And every woman in that room nodded, because they understood. They were proof that beauty could grow from destruction. One chilly November morning, Elise received an invitation. It wasn't just any invitation, it was from the American Art Institute, one of the most prestigious organizations in the country. They wanted to award her the Spirit of Humanity Medal, recognizing her work empowering women through art. For a long moment, she just stared at the letter. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't from sadness. It was disbelief, the full-circle poetry of life. 5 years ago, she'd walked out of a mansion with a crying child in her arms and nothing else. Now, she was being honored for helping thousands of others find their voice. Life had a way of coming back around, not to punish, but to prove. The night of the award ceremony was magical. It was held at Lincoln Center, beneath a canopy of golden lights that shimmered like hope itself. Elise wore a sleek navy gown, elegant but understated. Lila, now 10 years old, walked beside her in a simple white dress and silver flats. She looked up at her mother and whispered, "Are you nervous?" Elise smiled. "A little." "Don't be," Lila said matter-of-factly. "You already won." Elise laughed softly, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. "You're right, baby. I already did." When they entered the hall, applause broke out. Not for a Pierce. Not for a name built on power or money. But for a woman who'd built herself, piece by piece, scar by scar, into something unshakable. The presenter, a well-known curator, took the stage. "Tonight," she said, "we honor resilience. We honor transformation. And we honor a woman who turned her pain into purpose, not just for herself, but for countless others." She gestured toward Elise. "Please welcome, Ms. Elise Carter." As Elise approached the microphone, the crowd stood. The sound was thunderous, but it wasn't noise. It was acknowledgement. She took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and began. "5 years ago," she said, her voice calm but full of emotion, "I thought my life was over. I thought losing everything meant I had failed. But I learned something. Sometimes, life has to break you open to show you what's inside." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "Pain is not your identity. It's a moment in your story. What defines you is what you do next, how you rise, how you rebuild, how you love yourself through the wreckage." Applause filled the room, soft at first, then growing stronger. Elise continued. "When I started the Lila Project, I didn't know if anyone would come. But they did. And every woman who walked through those doors reminded me that healing is not a destination, it's a daily choice." Her eyes found Lila in the audience, sitting proudly in the front row. "I named it after my daughter," Elise said, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I wanted her to grow up knowing that her voice matters, that her light can never be dimmed by anyone's darkness." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. Tonight isn't about revenge. It's about redemption. It's about proving that you can walk through fire and come out gold. The applause rose again, this time a standing ovation. Elise stepped back, overwhelmed, humbled, alive. Later that evening, after the event ended, she stood outside on the terrace. The city glowed beneath her, a sea of lights stretching into forever. Daniel joined her, a quiet smile on his face. "You did it," he said. Elise laughed. "We did it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know, the first time I filmed you, I thought, this woman doesn't even realize she's the story she's been searching for." She smiled softly. "Maybe I just had to live it before I could tell it." He handed her a small box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, engraved with 5 words. Rise. Heal. Create. Love. Repeat. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "It's perfect." He shrugged, a little shy. "Seemed fitting. Thank you, Daniel. For believing in me when I forgot how to." He shook his head. "You didn't forget. You just needed reminding." They stood together, watching the skyline. The wind was cold, but her heart was warm. For once, she didn't think about the past, not the slap, not the mansion, not the pain. She just thought about tomorrow. Months later, Elise and Lila visited a new community center that had just opened in Brooklyn. The name on the plaque caught her breath. Pierce Estate Community Center. The mansion, the same one she had fled years ago, had been purchased by a nonprofit and converted into a hub for art, education, and outreach. Children's laughter filled the halls where silence and judgment once ruled. The grand dining room, where her daughter had been struck, was now a library full of bright colors and shelves of books. Elise stood quietly, running her fingers over the brass plaque. "Mom?" Lila asked softly. "Is this where it happened?" Elise nodded. "Yes. But it's different now." Lila tilted her head. "It feels happy." "It is," Elise said, smiling. "Because love always wins in the end." They wandered the halls, marveling at the transformation. The ghosts were gone. Only purpose remained. As they left, Elise paused on the front steps, looking up at the mansion one last time. The same wind that once carried her sobs now brushed gently through her hair. She whispered, "Thank you for breaking me. Because now, I know how to build myself." Then she turned, took her daughter's hand, and walked away, toward a future that belonged entirely to her. The years rolled on. Elise's name became synonymous with empowerment, her foundation a beacon of hope. She spoke on global stages, not as a victim, but as proof that survival is strength. And every time she told her story, she ended it the same way. Don't wait for karma to find them. Focus on finding yourself. Because peace, real peace, is the one thing they can never take. One day, Lila asked her, "Do you ever think about Grandma Victoria or Dad?" Elise hesitated, then smiled. "Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. I think of them as lessons, people who showed us how not to live." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Elise kissed her forehead. "You already are, baby. Strong, brave, and beautifully free." Years later, when Elise was invited back to Lincoln Center to give a commencement speech, she stood before thousands and shared one final reflection that defined everything she'd become. Sometimes life will test you so hard that you'll think it's punishing you. But maybe, it's preparing you. Preparing you to rise. Preparing you to lead. Preparing you to understand what real strength feels like, the kind that comes from choosing love over hate, peace over pride, and courage over fear. So if you're listening to this and you're standing in your own fire right now, remember, you will not burn. You are being refined. And one day, you'll stand in your light and say, "That's why it happened." The crowd erupted in applause. Some cried. Others simply nodded, deeply moved. Because they weren't just hearing a story, they were witnessing truth. That night, Elise returned home, tucked Lila into bed, and stepped out onto the balcony. The moon hung low, painting the city silver. She thought about every woman still trapped in silence. Every child growing up in a world that told them to stay small. Every soul who believed they'd lost too much to start over. And she whispered into the night. Keep going. You're stronger than you think. Your past does not define you. Your response to it does. Power and money fade, but integrity and courage last forever. Forgive not because they deserve peace, but because you do. And when the world underestimates you, smile. Because that's when you're about to show them exactly who you are.